The server environment settings group contains many low-level settings to control how the IPS community software interacts with your server and the web browser. Many of these settings are things that you are probably never going to want to change unless you have a specific circumstance in your server or the way browsers interact with your community, or if you have special character set considerations in your community. The first three sets are about character encoding, and you'd normally not want to change these. In most communities, the character set would be UTF-8. However, I am demonstrating this on the IPS company forums, and our install has been in existence for over 10 years. And back then, we didn't use UTF-8, although we do now. So that's why ours says ISO 8859-1. Most people use UTF-8 unless your database is old or you have a specific character set reason to change that. It is important to note that just by changing this setting, it does not re-encode your database. Even if you change your database, it does not re-encode the text. So do not simply change the setting and think that magically your entire character set will change. If all this sounds like a foreign language to you, skip this setting because most everyone UTF-8 is just fine. The same with the next couple things. Character conversion method is about how the software changes character conversions internally. You usually want to use internal unless you have a reason not to because of your server settings or if technical support is assisting you with a problem related to your character sets. Same is true for the third one, the AJAX system. Most of the time you're going to want to leave this enabled because AJAX makes the browsing experience much more smooth. There's far fewer refreshes and redirects. Things happen in line more. However, with some specialized character sets, AJAX may not work correctly, and you can disable that if you're having trouble in your community. Next few settings are about skins and your server. Safe mode skins pull the skin files from cached PHP files on your server, rather than from the database directly. Generally, if your server supports it, using safe mode skins is much faster because they're pre-parsed, they're ready to go, rather than pulling them from the database on every single click. If you have the settings set to yes, it pulls them from pre-cached files. If you set this to no, it pulls the skins from the database every time someone clicks a link in your community. There are circumstances where you might need to set them to no and pull them from the database, but whenever possible, we do recommend leaving this setting on yes because it does speed up your community. gzip encoding compresses the output of their text and such before sending it out to the browser. Generally, this is much faster. However, there are certain server environments where either gzip is not available, it's not working correctly, or it might actually slow things down if the server is not configured correctly. However, almost all the time, you're going to want to leave gzip enabled. The next couple settings are about headers, and you almost always want to print the HTTP headers because that gives the browser additional information about what that page is. If it's a normal page, an error page, things like that. There are some Windows server configurations where this causes problems, so you can shut that off here if need be. But you're generally going to want to leave that on. No cache headers stop browsers from caching a page, so they always get the latest content. You're almost always going to want to leave that off because otherwise the browser is going to constantly be re-caching everything, and that becomes very inefficient. The next one about the thanks redirect page, this is purely a preference. Shutting them off shows fewer redirect messages, such as thank you for your input, we are redirecting you. It skips those pages, which just makes the browsing experience much more smooth and user-friendly. The same with the next thing about redirect type. HTTP header location is instant. People click a link, if they need to be redirected, it instantly happens with no intermediary please wait page. However, there are certain server configurations where this may not work correctly, so we offer these two other methods here. But generally, if your server supports it, you should keep the HTTP header enabled because that's the cleanest method. The next couple of settings are actually settings you probably would never need to change. The HTTP authentication, what this is for is if you have your community behind HT access or HTTP authentication, where it prompts the browser for a username and password before your community is even loaded. There are circumstances where the software may need to connect to itself for various specialized functions. Generally, this is not required. But basically, what this is for is it allows you to enter the username and password to itself. Again, most of the time, these settings are not required. And finally, the cookie settings can normally be left blank. However, there are circumstances where on the cookie domain, you may want your community cookies read across your entire domain. So in our example here, we have community.envisionpower.com. But let's say we wanted our community cookies to be read everywhere on envisionpower.com. You would simply change it to .envisionpower.com. And that's useful, so if you want to see someone's logged in on your main website or for tracking purposes, things like that, you could do that here to allow the cookies globally. The cookie prefix is useful if you have multiple communities under the same domain and you want to separate out the cookies so they do not conflict with each other. You could do a prefix there. It's also useful if you're, let's say you're debugging something or you made some major changes and you want to force everyone to log out and back in. If you change the cookie prefix, then everyone's old cookies will no longer be valid and they'll have to log in again. And that's kind of a quick trick to force everyone to log out and back in. And finally, the cookie path normally can be left blank, but that's so if you had multiple installations in different subdirectories, you might say /forum1 or /forum2 here to segregate them out. So that's the server environment settings. Again, most of these are things that you're probably never going to change, but they are here if your server environment or specific needs warrant changing them.